Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast. The NBA playoffs are here, and Michelob Ultra is getting you closer to the game than ever with courtside seats and more. Enter now at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access Courtside 2024 to 2025 sweepstakes. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Ends on July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/superior access/courtside for free entry deadlines and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
Llegaron los nuevos McCrispy Strips, listos para aventurarse en la mezcla de mayo ketchup, la barbecue que quedó en el fondo de la cajita, hot fudge sundae y en la nueva creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Los nuevos McCrispy Strips, ahora en McDonald's. Para pa pa pa.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game, with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. I'm momentarily distracted by the fact that Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire has begun to undress as we speak. What are you doing?
Club member special. What
were you doing?
Well, I put on a cardi a bit earlier, and I thought it's June. And it's not a very big room. I've been in here a few minutes, starting to warm up, especially with some of the tales you've just been telling me.
What's said in the pod green room, Kieran, stays in the pod green room. Right. It is quite cold. I've left the dining room door open for the cat, who's resolutely refusing to come in, even though I can see her whiskers blowing in the gale. It's questions day, Kieran. I'm a little bit tired, I'll admit, because my first question is, what sort of idiot does a 12-hour round journey to spend an hour and 5 minutes in a Wetherspoons in North Wales, which is what I did at the weekend, and I'm still in 2 pints. I had 2 pints. I had time for 2 pints. Went all the way from London to Chester, then got a bus to Ruthin, and an hour in Wetherspoons, got the bus back, train back. I wasn't even doing a gig. In the old days, I'd have been doing that for cash money. I just went up as an act of kindness and friendship, which I will never let the person forget that I did, which takes away the edge of it being an act of kindness and friendship, especially as he didn't have time to come and pick me up from the station. Because he won't be forgetting that in a hurry either. You know, you've met Roy, so you
I have indeed. Yes, a fine gentleman.
Oh, that's not what we were calling him yesterday.
I can imagine.
We've got some good questions today, Kieran, I have to say. The first one makes complete sense, and it comes from Paul Evans, and it's a question actually we get asked a lot, normally at the end of the season, when people are wondering why other clubs aren't being done for profit and sustainability rules, thus letting their club avoid relegation. It's that time of the year. And Paul says, could you give me a bit more detail on the EFL and Championship financial rules? I don't really understand how the top tier of the pyramid has a completely different set of guidelines and rules to the rest of it. And it's a question many people are. It makes... we know it's historical. We know that the EFL and the Premier League are trying to sort of amalgamate their rules a bit more. But why do they have completely different sets of rules going? And the EFL, within the EFL, there are different sets of rules, aren't there?
There are. Once upon a time, the Premier League and the EFL were quite good friends. So therefore...
That sounds like the start of a fairy tale.
It does, yes. So when in 2008, 2009, Michel Platini came up with the initial variant of financial fair play, the Premier League and the EFL got round the table and said, we need to have some form of logic from when clubs are going from the Premier League to the Championship and vice versa. So therefore, we do have if you're doing a Venn diagram, you'd say, well, the Premier League and the EFL rules in the Championship are pretty big overlap there, in the sense that in the Premier League you can lose £105 million over 3 years, and in the EFL Championship you can lose 39. Now that 39 does include what we refer to as secure funding, which most people seem to believe is shares from shareholders. But if you take a look at the small print, it actually goes further. So we've got one set of rules which allow clubs, if you get relegated from the Premier League to the EFL Championship, it works on the basis of it's £13 million for each year in the EFL, 35 million in each year for the Premier League, and you work out the sum for the club and you move ahead. So there is a degree of logic in that. Then we have a complete volte-face, a complete change of gear, in the sense that League One and League Two have nothing in common with the Championship. In League One, you can spend 60% of your revenue on player wages. You can then add in something called Football Fortune, and Football Fortune is 100% of the money from cup runs, 100% of the money from player sales, but only the cash part. So if you're a club in League One and you sell a player, let's say you sell a player for £6 million, and that's being paid over 3 instalments, you'd only be allowed to include £2 million a year in your calculations. And then they've tightened up the rules relatively recently. There has been a change to the EFL handbook, because they were concerned that some owners in League One and League Two could put money into the club in the form of donations or shares. And previously, for every £1 you put in, you could spend £1 on wages, which allowed some clubs to buy their ways out of those divisions. So the rules now being changed. For your first £500,000, you get a 1-for-1 allowance in terms. You put in $500,000, you can spend wages on $500,000. But then the next 250,000, it's 75%. The next 250,000, it's 60%. And anything over that, you can only claim for half the money put in. So fiendishly complicated. I did spend quite a bit of time doing this, but actually that was time well spent, because earlier today, I'm not saying this is a penance. It's not a case of the fact that I dragged the poor Baroness down to Hove on Friday nights to watch an absolutely dreadful game of cricket, and it was freezing. I mean, anybody that's ever watched cricket at Hove, you're probably about 600 to 800 yards from the sea. And if it's a cold wind, and it was, there's not a lot of places to hide. So yeah, early today, we went to John Lewis on a Sunday,
Whoa.
Kevin, because the Baroness wanted cushions for the bed, and I'm going,
What?
Why do you want cushions for the bed? Because when you get into bed, you throw the cushions off the bed.
Yeah.
And I've never quite understood this. And this is not me being, men behaving badly, sort of 80s laddish. I've just never understood the logic of why you have to have cushions on beds. But we do, and apparently they need changing because we've got a new duvet cover. And this is letting listeners into the secrets of my life. And it's even more tedious when I'm not doing spreadsheets, but it did allow me to read while she was doing this. I sat down and I read the EFL handbook in the middle of Lewis.
I did wonder where you were going with that, but it's of course you go to bed, you throw the cushions off the bed, you throw the cat off the bed, the cat comes back onto the bed.
Yes,
at least the cushions have the decency to stay where you put them. And then the cat decides she wants your part of the bed, and Ali says you need to man up when it comes to this cat. And I go, it's Smudge. She's so comfortable. And then she wakes me up at 6 o'clock in the morning. The cushions don't wake me up. So in many ways, I prefer the cushions to the cat. So a couple of things to ask you about, Kieran. So essentially, you could summarise it that in League One and Two, it's about how much you spend. In the Championship and the Premier League, it's about how much you can lose.
Yes, in terms of
okay.
absolutely. So it's a really good way of summarising.
So, but again, just to sort of underline Paul's question, I think there are two things. Why are the Premier League rules so different? And why is it that Championship clubs, when they're promoted, are still meant to live by the Championship rules, aren't they, for a couple of seasons? Is that right?
That they are, and this is an area where I do think it's very harsh on clubs that have just been promoted. We saw Nottingham Forest get a points deduction when they committed the crime of being really good in the Championship and going up with a squad that cost £12 million, and they're trying to compete against squads which cost more than £1 billion. But they were only allowed to lose £61 million over 3 years, yet Chelsea and Manchester United, Manchester City and Liverpool, so they could have all lost 105 million. So it does seem to make things more difficult for clubs that have just been promoted. And then you ask yourself, who's made these rules? Oh, it's the existing clubs in the Premier League. Now, what do they want the clubs just promoted from the Championship to do? They want them to go straight back down again. So therefore, they've created a set of rules which has made it that much more difficult for promoted sides to be competitive, even if the owner wants to put money in. And I do think there are workarounds to this. If the owner commits to putting money into an escrow account, we've all spoken about this, some form of bond, it can be dealt with, but there's no desire to introduce such rules, as we saw, and we'll be covering this later in this week because the Premier League executives had a meeting on Thursday, and lo and behold, they've voted to preserve the Chelsea get-around in terms of selling the women's team to make it allowable now for 19 other clubs.
Yeah, which you predicted would happen last week. It seems, Kieran, I can't remember a time when we didn't have profit and sustainability rules, but you mentioned 2008, 2009 being the year Platini had the idea. So before that, then was it pretty much a free for all? Could clubs pretty much spend what they want with no ramifications?
It was. If you take a look at the acquisition of Chelsea by Roman Abramovich, Chelsea went from having the fifth or sixth highest wage bill to not just having the biggest wage bill, but beating everybody into submission. I think David Dean, the former head of Arsenal, said one morning I woke up and Roman Abramovich was there with these tanks on my lawn firing £50 notes, and we couldn't compete. It's exactly the same when Sheikh Mansour acquired Manchester City in 2008, 2009. That allowed Manchester City, I think it was in 2011, Manchester City lost in a single season £198.7 million. That's in one season. So these rules came in after that, which of course frustrates the fans of Newcastle, Villa, Forest, the other clubs which you mentioned on many occasions, because they're not able to spend simply because of a function of time, rather than a function of this has always been part of the football environment.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Ed Ritter. And Ed says, we know that red cards happen, but they are certainly detrimental to the team when they occur. Do contracts ever contain clauses penalising a player if a straight red or a certain number of red cards are received, or is this typically handled via a fine scheme? So you'll have noticed a slight hesitation there, Kieran. That's because Ali is trying to sneak over to the door and close it before Smudge notices, and Smudge has noticed. So I'm not the only one who gets outflanked by a cat most evenings. So yes, it's an interesting question, Kieran. I don't know if players get enough red cards for it to become an issue that's dealt with outside a fines scheme, would it?
Yeah, and I think it also depends upon what was the rationale behind the red card itself. So if we take the case of Mario Balotelli, when Mario came to Liverpool, and he was only at Liverpool for one season, he was on, whilst it wasn't a fine, it was sort of a reversal. His contract said he was entitled to a £1 million bonus if he was not sent off 3 times during his time at his first season at Liverpool, if the cause of the red card was spitting, violent conduct, offensive language, or dissent. So if it had been a couple of professional fouls and he'd saved Liverpool and helped them to win a match, that would have gone into the consideration. But I think there were quite specific issues. My understanding is that you don't tend to have such clauses. It could be, however, if you are recruiting a player for whom, should we say, has a bit of a rep. Can there be some form of incentivization? Yes, there can. And again, I think it would be very much toward, you don't want to stop combative players from being combative. We both recall the era of Norman Hunter and Billy Bremner and Johnny Giles and so on, who were no shirkers when it came to putting the foot in, and of course, the likes of Vinnie Jones and so on. Those players, part of their makeup was being robust. So therefore, you wouldn't want to take away their game. And also think about it from the player's point of view. You've been sent off twice. You've got a clause in your contract. You get a third red card. You're on a yellow. You're going to think, I'm not going to go in for any more 50-50s. So I think it has to be very carefully monitored. The fine system, and Premier League players still have to pay a fine. I think it's between £55 and £75 when they get a red card. That will be from the local football association, as well as anything which is done internally, and the internal repercussions tend to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So if you get if you're sent off for spitting at the referee or something like that, then the chances are that's going to trigger something.
So are you saying, Kieran, like a Sunday footballer, if a Premier League footballer gets sent off, he's got to pay the fine to the local FA? Oh, that's quite reassuring to know, somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, and I have seen a few wage slips.
Wow.
Where there's actually been a list of deductions: national insurance, pension contribution, yellow card for calling the referee a wanker, £35.
Of course, in Balotelli's day, I imagine they'd have a clause in the contract saying any red card issued except by Mark Clattenburg, because that would be wrong. It's strange, isn't it, when our generation, you get shown videos of Billy Bremner and Norman Hunter and Johnny Giles, as you say, in their pomp, and you kind of laugh, but then you go, thank God they're not allowed to play like that anymore, because it was brutal, really. Even the Vinnie Jones, we're all supposed to find it hilarious, a photograph of Vinnie Jones squeezing Paul Gascoigne by the knackers. I just think, thank God the game's moved on from that terrible time. Jude McCarthy has our next question. And I know this is something that resonates with you, Kieran. This is one of your many. You've got a lot of high horses, let's face it.
And bees in bonnets.
And bees in. I wouldn't ride a high horse with a bee in my bonnet, to be perfectly honest.
True.
Health and safety wise, I think you're probably asking for a bit of trouble. Especially you have enough trouble with the local wildlife as it is without getting on a high horse down there. So Jude McCarthy says, given the propensity of some clubs to publish minimal information or to hide, camouflage, exclude or ignore information which could embarrass them or might raise questions about the conduct and values of the owners, could the new independent regulator produce a template accounting standard which all clubs are required to use, disclosing all the information that stakeholders would benefit from seeing? And I'd like to add to that, Kieran, when football clubs do publish minimum information or information late, are other businesses allowed to do the same thing, or is football given more leeway than other businesses?
No, this is a universal thing, and in fact, probably at least 95% of companies which have been created in the UK under Companies Act legislation would qualify for what we refer to as being a small company.
Right.
And therefore, they don't have to produce profit and loss information. They don't have to produce cash flow information. There's very, very much a scaled down requirement in terms of disclosures of balance sheet information as well. So it is much broader, and the thresholds have just been increased as well. So I think more football clubs are likely to be in a position where they can choose to not disclose, and it is a choice. You can be fully transparent, or you could choose not to be. So, as far as the independent regulator is concerned, there is nothing in the proposed legislation in which football clubs as a proviso for being granted a license to play professional football in the United Kingdom, in England and Wales, there is no proviso that they have to produce what I would call a full set of accounts, which is where's the money? Yeah, how much money have you made? Where's that come from? How much are you spending on wages? How much are you spending on amortization? What are your overheads? What's your interest? How much are you paying to the directors? And so on. So that is not going to be part of it. Having said that, the regulator, if they have reservations about clubs, they can request that information themselves. And also that information, and people say, well, hold on, this is another reason why we shouldn't have a regulator, because it's putting making it a more onerous reporting requirement for clubs. This is the information which goes to the EFL, I can assure you. So yeah, we're asking that the regulator doesn't get any more. Should that information be in the public domain? Well, the clubs or some club owners, they tend, we talk about football clubs. Football clubs don't have opinions. Football clubs are simply inert entities in their own right. So ultimately, it comes down to football club owners. They will claim that by making such disclosures, it is commercially sensitive, and therefore they're entitled to some form of protection. So that's the argument put forward. I must confess, I am in the other camp. I'm not just saying this because I get really twitchy when I can't do things completely. It's a bit like my Panini collection. Well, having a list of League One and League Two clubs where I've only got 18 of them showing revenues and bits and pieces, I haven't got it for the other 6. So in League Two, it's only a fraction of them. If you want to be a professional football club, and also just remember this, you professional football clubs, you are asking fans in March and April to buy their season tickets for the following season. Well, if you're asking somebody to give you interest-free credit, then they're entitled to do some form of credit check. And in my opinion, that should mean that if you want to be able to sell season tickets in advance, you should publish full information. Look, 99% of fans don't give a stuff. And I absolutely understand it. As much as it's sort of my career is based on football finance, I didn't fall in love with football for that reason. And most fans go to football to escape it. But there will be some fans at every club who will say, actually, we want to speak truth to power. We do want the idea of transparency. And we have seen, certainly, I've been sent stuff by fans to say, can you look into this a bit more detail? And I picked it up from the club accounts, and I've been able to report back. And that has helped them hold those owners to account. So I do think that from a speak truth to power, from a transparency, from a custodian perspective, there is a case for saying, if you want the benefits that you get from being a football club, local suppliers will give you additional credit because, hey, you're the local club. Your fans go over and above. I know so many fans of League One and League Two clubs who when their season tickets were due to be repaid during COVID, they said, no, this is my football club. I want this football club to exist. Well, if you want fans to buy into that, then in my opinion, I appreciate other opinions are available, then the least you can do is actually be open and upfront with them.
This episode is sponsored by Shopify. When we started The Price of Football and things started to take off, it all got a bit overwhelming at times as we were suddenly sorting out recordings, interviews, live shows, and our online store. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can easily begin to overrun your life. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify.
Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. With Shopify, you get your own design studio that includes hundreds of ready-to-use templates. You can accelerate your content creation with Shopify's AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. And you can easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify.
Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/price of football, all lowercase. So go to shopify.co.uk/price of football to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/price of football.
If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo.
I know what a completist you are, Kieran, when it comes to collecting, so I feel your pain, brother. And the fact that Panini are now doing stickers for League One, League Two clubs as well.
I know. I've not mentioned it to the Baroness.
Of course you haven't. You could have bought the 2 extra cushions and then slipped the news in. I fully agree. It seems to me obvious that transparency is the best way forward, but I do understand that sensitive commercial information argument. But as long as I'm reassured that if the EFL or the Premier League were to ask, they have to be given access to that information, then I would go fine. You don't have to publish the accounts, but if the EFL want to see them, you have to show them in detail. Is that the case?
That's right. That's right. All clubs have to submit more detailed financial analysis than we see at Companies House.
Because also, and again, this is, I know Man United fans think we're picking on, we really aren't, but there's some baffling things going on at that club. I'd be interested to look at Man United's accounts to see how they can go from 8 weeks ago saying that they have to make extraordinary cutbacks on concessionary season tickets, parking spaces for disabled people and so on, and yet they are able to afford to bid for Cunha and Mbermo and pay them some fairly high wages. And I think, again, the Premier League should be able to say, hang on a second, the first part of that argument 8 weeks ago, we'd quite like to see where this money's coming from. So as long as I know that's able to happen, then I'm fine. I mean, I wouldn't be able to understand or interpret an account sheet anyway in the way you could. And I don't think it would help most fans if they would simply to put in a request to say, I'd like to see Rotherham's accounts, please, or I'd like to see Colchester's accounts. But I'm reassured to know that if the authorities need to see that information, they have to be shown that information. Now, Al Innes has an interesting question involving captaincy of the football club, and it's only really in England and Scotland and Wales that the issue of captaincy is taken, seriously. In most continental clubs, it's the senior player, so either the oldest player or the player with the longest amount of time at the club, and all they do is shake hands and swap pennants, whereas the English club captain is a kind of revered figure of authority. So Al Innes says, how does media work and captaincy affect player wages? We hear a lot these days about leadership groups and so forth, and it seems that only certain players get called in for media interviews, etc., outside of the match day cycle. So is this something that's contractual and voluntary, or are players and captains given bonuses and so forth to account for the extra work they're expected to do, or they just don't for the prestige love of the game? Has a player ever turned down a captaincy because their agent couldn't agree on a suitable stipend? Now, I can offer some insight into the broadcasting aspect of that, is that the broadcasters are contractually obliged to ask for any player they want, both post-match and during the week. But the broadcasters pretty soon learn which of the 3 or 4 players at the club that give best value in front of the camera, because some of them are young kids and they're not comfortable in front of the camera, or they will answer, like Michael Olise, for example, was very uncomfortable in front of the camera, so the broadcasters knew not to ask him. So that's why you see the same 3 or 4 faces. But I generally don't know whether they would get extra money for that responsibility, Kieran.
Right. Only one person to ask. our secret agent. Or one of our secret agents. We are very, very fortunate to have quite a few. See, And the seat agent replied, some clubs used to have a captain's bonus, but that is in decline. That is becoming far more of a rarity. You wouldn't get anything extra for the club media work either.
Oh, okay. Right.
But then goes on to say, and again raises I think a very valid point. It's the thing which goes under the radar. It says the real heroes are the boys and girls that do community work in their own time, which is not an obligation. And every player's contract does say you've got to do X hours per week or X hours per month. And there are some absolutely amazing footballers out there at Crystal Palace, at Brighton, at Manchester United, at Liverpool, who understand just how revered they are. And they see it as a privilege, not a chore. And hats off to them for doing that. And also, going back to COVID, the number of stories I'd heard from players phoning up fans, especially vulnerable fans, old fans, single fans, and so on, saying it's such and such from Rovers or City or wherever it was, and it genuinely made a difference. But that doesn't get clicks, so it tends to go under the radar.
Do you know what? I wouldn't embarrass the players at Palace who do that by naming them, because I know that they would be embarrassed by having and we're lucky enough to have a squad at the moment where many of the players, like you say, see it as a privilege. They think it's their moral or religious duty to do so, to get out in the community. We all see the videos of how mad the kids go when they see them, especially now. But also, remember we had that brilliant interview with Birdo Glimt just a few weeks ago, where they still, because so many, it's a very remote rural district. So once a week, the players come in, get on a phone, and fans can give them the number of their dad, their mum, their granny, say they're a bit down, they haven't seen, and they phone up and say they chat, and it takes 10 minutes of their time, and it makes somebody very happy. But as you say, it's amazing how people. If you work in a bank, a friend of mine always said this. He worked in a bank, and over their many headquarters, there's probably 3,000 young men between the age of 20 and 30 working for that huge bank. And he said 5 of them are wrong-uns, and 5 of them are actual saints, but the rest of them are just decent fellas, decent girls who would do the right thing in most. And it's the same with football clubs.
Yeah,
it's the same with whether it's men's football or women's football. There's still so many people dismiss players as venal idiots, and that simply isn't the case. And for the most part, some players find it easier to do than others because, again, some of the younger players are not comfortable in their own skin yet because they're only 18 or 19. But playing football, I don't know why people are so anti-football. I think it's because of how much they earn, isn't it? It's what it is, basically. We've got 2 more questions left, Kieran, and they're 2 questions of the sort that I really like, in that they seem really obvious, but I wonder why. And in fact, the first one, I'm actually quite cross that I've never answered this before, because it seems like a blindingly obvious one. And I'm not going to mention which London-based club would probably be asking this about why UEFA are getting their knickers in a twist about things that are going to be resolved anyway. When you got so David Rigby says, how can Emirates Airlines sponsor both the FA Cup and Arsenal? Is this not a massive conflict? Apart from being slightly miffed that the red and blue ribbons on the FA Cup say Emirates, it's never actually occurred to me that this might be an issue in any way, shape or form. Yeah,
when I first read David's question, I thought, well, I can't really see an issue here. But the more I thought about it, I say, actually, it's in Emirates' interests that Arsenal do well in the FA Cup each year because it's extending their advert. And could they therefore put a wee bit of pressure on the FA? So I think conceptually there is a potential conflict of interest. There's, as you say, there are people getting very angry about multi-club ownership issues at present, and as I've been trying to say to as many people and as many broadcasters as I can, Kevin, and that everything should be done on a proportionate basis. But this is multi-club sponsorship or multi-institution sponsorship, so therefore why can that be the case? And people might even remember many years ago when both Celtic and Rangers had the same shirt sponsor. And the rationale for that at the time was that because things are so toxic in Glasgow, that some sponsors realised that it wasn't worth sponsoring one of the clubs because immediately 50% of the city would have absolutely nothing to do with their product. So by sponsoring both clubs, you actually managed to overcome that particular hurdle. I think was it C.R. Smith?
C.R. Smith, yeah.
The sponsor. C.R. Smith, yeah. So in this case, again, provided there is evidence, provided there are ethical walls between the two organisations, between Arsenal and the Football Association, then I see no problem. Just equally, if there are ethical walls between how an individual can own shares in more than one football club, provided those football clubs have nothing to do with each other, then they are not part of a multi-club ownership group. I suspect we'll come back to this more on Thursday. So that's the position. Also, David, I've got to be honest, probably the numbers involved aren't big enough to warrant those conflicts arising. Although Arsenal are probably in receipt of £40 million a year from Emirates. We don't know how much the Emirates are paying the FA as well. The FA's finances and that of Wembley Stadium were subject to a very good piece of writing from our good friend Matt Slater. And I've been looking at some of the weird and wonderful numbers at Wembley, and this was along a broader issue. As would it have made more sense for the FA to have sold Wembley Stadium to Shahid Khan and let Fulham play there? Because they were offered a lot of money.
Oh, that's interesting. We probably will come back to it on Thursday, Kieran, but how long we spend on it depends on whether or not UEFA make the correct decision. Because if they do, then we'll just be a passing comment. And if they don't, it'll be part one of a 64-part Price of Football special that will aim to bring UEFA crashing down from within. John McAleer, I think Producer Guy, before we move on, Karen, I think Producer Guy would like us to point out that we are in no way, shape or form suggesting that anyone from Emirates would whisper in Ian Wright's ear when he's doing the draw for the third round of the FA Cup. Just
Arsenal's the hot ball. Arsenal's the hot ball, Ian.
We've blown on the ball, which is my dad went to his grave insisting that's how you did it. You threw Liverpool's ball into the frying pan, got warmed up. They knew to pick that one out first for a home draw. I said, Dad, that doesn't. It kept him happy, along with flirting with nurses, kept him happy. That's fine. So there is no suggestion whatsoever from the Price of Football that the Emirates airline is putting undue pressure on anyone at the FA Cup to make sure Arsenal get through to the FA Cup final. John McAleer has this last question. And again, it's one of those questions you think, it's a really good, simple question that I'm amazed. It's a sort of simple question that occurs to me normally, because I can't suggest complicated questions. These are the sort of questions I regard as keys being waved in front of people. So that's sort of question I'll do. Oh yeah, bright shiny object. I'll ask that. With regards to players' wages, says John McAleer, do they have special bank accounts that deal with the sums of money they would get, or are there specialist banks that deal with the sums of money Premier League players get paid? So are they likely to be on high street banks but with personal bank managers, or will they be with the likes of Coots or so? It depends how much they earn, obviously, but...
That's right. It is a classic case of it depends. One of the reasons why Barclays Bank is keen to, whilst it's no longer the Barclays Premier League, I think Barclays has been the official banking partner of the Premier League for some time. And one of the reasons for that is that it wants to be able to offer private banking services, or the equivalent of private banking service, which you rightly said, Coots and so can provide. So wealth management, investment advice, pensions advice, tax advice, and so on. And that's very much aimed at the players in the Premier League. The average salary of a Premier League player, based on my figures, is between £3 and £3.5 million a year. So do you need to spend it at that rate? Probably not. So what are you going to do with it? There's also many agents or management companies who effectively offer this as a form of a bolt-on service, and they would often outsource that particular responsibility to a consultant or a private bank to look after the players' affairs. What we're also seeing, and this is again sort of slightly different, but linked to banking, is that some players who are not from the country in which they're playing, and all of our focus, we just think of foreign players going to the UK, but if you take a look at the whole of the European market, you've got some countries, such as Turkey, which suffer from galloping inflation. So do you want to be paid in Turkish lira, or do you want to be paid in euros or sterling, depending on where you're based? So there are banks that will offer specific currency-related services to players as well, and that can attach repercussions. And then, of course, we've got the fact that some players are not paid directly. Instead, the money goes to their image rights company. Or a proportion. Normally we say that we think that the ceiling at a Premier League level will be 20%, and then that money is distributed. So again, the bank would be able to provide services there. So that's what we are seeing, and it is increasingly complex. But you're dealing with young men and young women who are earning millions of pounds a year. Sometimes it can be more than tens of millions of pounds a year. And therefore, they do need protection because there are far too many sharks out there. I'm aware of some players where their management team effectively gives them a monthly allowance. And they say, this is what we propose to do with you. The player says, actually, that sounds like quite a good idea. And then the player sort of has to manage their own finances on a very, very small fraction of the total salary that they receive.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
A lot of our listeners are going to say, it's time to get the world's smallest violin out here, Kieran. And let's assume we're talking about players in the Championship and above who are paid the big money. So I'm assuming League One, League Two level, many players handle their own finances. Although even there, you're still talking about more money than most people listening to this.
Yeah, I mean, the average salary, I reckon, in League One is probably around about $3.5 grand a week. Be sort of two-ish, or under two, and quite often in League Two. So yes, certainly far more than the average wage here in the UK.
But yeah, I'm guessing though that most of those players will probably be managing their own finances. But it does play into the narrative of those. In the Premier League, Jack Grealish or John Philippe Mateta isn't going to be the one phoning up his bank manager to sort problems out. Because there won't be any problems because they paid a lot of money. But it comes back to something we've said right from the start of this pod, is that footballers are not taught enough about how to manage money. So that when Jack Grealish does retire from football and is looking after his own financial affairs for how long, he's not got that much experience in doing so. Yeah,
that's right.
And a young player who's getting his first contract at Palace or Sheffield United, similarly, no experience or very little experience of how to manage money all of a sudden. And they haven't gone through the process that most people do growing up when they start on a £200 a week, and they end up on £50,000 a week. And I know that you've been involved and the PFA are involved in various schemes, but it still seems to me that more needs to be done to help young players in the game to understand how money works even.
It does. And I'm not saying this applies to all management consultants or management agents and so on. When you retire and your contract expires on the 30th of June, most agents say, good luck with the future, young man. I'm off to get my next commission. And that's not a criticism of agents, because they are football agents. They are not post-football agents. And therefore, all of a sudden, you are in a bit of a situation with which you might not be familiar. And football clubs at high end in particular, they encourage players not to think. All they want, you've often given that example of that former international player that you've worked with, who retired and then 3 weeks later had a toothache, didn't know what to do, because the football clubs want you to think about football, and nothing but football. All externalities, we will sort it for you, which is great. It's a PA, it's a valet service, whatever you want to call it. But you're going to stop playing football at one point in time, and you then have to go through a cliff edge in terms of having to learn the intricacies of the things which, I'm not saying that we're privileged, we're in a different, completely, the things that we learned over a period of time because we come from a different working environment.
Of course, there are people listening to this who may be saying to themselves, people who know me, it'd be quite nice if there was some way of educating middle-aged comedians about how to look after money properly. I think that ship may have sailed. But I just think it is something that, again, people forget about. Everyone assumes that Premier, God, he's a footballer. What a fantastic life he has. And of course, he or she does have a fantastic life as a footballer. And most footballers, again, when you meet them, they fully realise how lucky they are to be doing the job they're doing. But it comes with a downside, and the financial issues is one of. We still see too many players, ex-players, who have all sorts of issues post-football with their money, and sometimes because they've been badly advised about investments or tax avoidance and so on. Thank you to everyone who's joined the Price of Football Club. I'm going to say club because Guy puts it in block capitals, and I don't think I've been giving it enough emphasis. So the Price of Football Club. If you'd like to join the club too, I didn't say it that time because the second time he puts it in small letters. That's not the grown-up way of saying it. It's not small letters, is it? Is it small letter? Lowercase, there you go. And get every episode a day earlier than everyone else. I'm still tired, Kieran, because of the 12 hours to Wales for an hour in a Wetherspoons scenario. You get all sorts of benefits from being part of the Price of Football Club. Ad-free listening, early episodes, live Zoom Q&As with Kieran. You get your own...
We've got a quiz coming up in a couple of weeks.
Oh my God, the quiz. I forgot the quiz, yeah. Yeah, we had a very moving message on social media from someone who won the quiz last year and told us how important it was at a time when his life wasn't going brilliantly. And it's kind of put a little spring in my step. You get all sorts of things. And if you want to know what you get, go to our website, priceoffootball.com. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter, X, or whatever Elon Musk decides to call it, after his spectacular toddler falling out with the other toddler running the world. And you can find us on YouTube. And if you'd like to buy one of our books or even a Price of Football t-shirt, you can find all the details on our website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with our weekly news pod. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, as always, thank you to everybody in the club, just £3.99 a month. or not in the club, for all the support you've given. And I'd just like to send out a special message to one of our listeners, and you know who you are, Robert, who after I wouldn't say it wasn't a rant, it was just an observation that Nestle were no longer selling dark chocolate Toblerones. He said, I was listening to you in Barcelona airport and I brought some across and he's posted them to me. Our listeners are just wonderful. I'm really moved. So thank you very much. That will be nibbled with care. I won't let the Baroness, well, she doesn't like dark chocolate. I won't even put them for my special dessert, which is strawberries dipped in melted Toblerone. I'm going to keep that Toblerone just for myself.
You're a Brighton fan, you say?
Yeah. I live quite close to Lewis as well.
Yeah, strawberries dipped in milk. You have to go to the trouble of melting the Toblerone. That's very nice of Robert.
You can't dip a strawberry in a non-melted Toblerone, can you?
Yeah, no, fair point. Yeah, technical point, but yeah, fair point, well made. Yeah, if Robert is listening, of course, I can't find Lagerfeld aftershave anywhere. Simply can't find it anywhere. I've lost my E-Type Jaguar as well. Can't find that anymore. Of course, you have to melt the chocolate. This is why I don't get asked to do Celebrity Bake Off. A, I'm not a celebrity. B, the idea of Noel Fielding watching when I try and smash a strawberry into a Toblerone bar. I suppose Kieran said you just dip it in the bar. I said, I think you're meant to temper it first. Don't you tell me what to do with melted chocolate, Fielding. That's a pleasing image of it. But it's got to be dark. It's got to be dark chocolate Toblerone, isn't it?
No. For the Toblerone and chocolate and strawberry sensation, no, it's regular.
So it's a sensation now, is it?
Sensation. Oh, absolutely.
Anyway, what can our listeners do, by the way, in their customary farewell?
Oh yes. You could pop along and just give us a review. Go on to your app, and it helps. It helps us with the charts. It helps us when we're trying to get guests on the show. Though God knows what they think when they read of them. But it doesn't bother myself or Kevin. We are men of a certain age. Our egos can cope with whatever you write. So even if you would say you would rather have the show presented by Tommy Vance and Noel Fielding, that would be a very surreal show. Yeah. I would pay to listen to that. I'd pay £3.99 a month for that.
It'd be a long one as well. He's a very good footballer, Noel Fielding.
Oh,
he knows his football well. He's a really good footballer. Oh, wow. Very elegant midfielder in a Trevor Brookings sort of style.
Oh, right. Yeah. Robert Smith was a brilliant winger.
No.
Yeah, I've had. Yeah. He was county standard.
Really?
Yeah.
How could he see the ball for all that eyeliner and fringe? He was. I can't even really.
Yeah.
I could imagine him as a kind of 1960s Keds style winger, being made to stand on the touchline because he was so frail. Stop singing, Smith. Get out there. I'd have been more surprised if he'd said he was a rugby fullback, to be honest, Kieran. But
yes, true.
The things you learn on this show that have nothing to do with football finance. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.